time to abandon ship.
Oh no!
Here we go!
Can I persuade you to join us for a drink? It's a tradition.
Here, here.
Jar Jar, homie, my main man, quickly. Before the Separatists attack, get into the escape pod.
Hey! This is escape, then we're the pod.
Welcome back to Star Wars Escape Pod. We hope you all really enjoyed watching The Mandalorian and Grogu. We hope you enjoyed our review. We have a good time on this show. So if you've never listened to Star Wars Escape Pod before, welcome to the podcast. We tend to have a pretty good time around here, and we do have a few recommended episodes, including the What Happened on Darth Plagueis. We recommend checking us out on Spotify. All of the links to our podcast playlist that we've curated is available through the website www.starwarspodcast.ca or the link tree. And we also have links in every description below. You can kind of dig deeper and dive into all of the last years that we've been doing this. I mean, it's coming up on 7 years now and over 420 episodes. Crazy. So welcome. It's a bit of a different episode this week. We're exploring a bit of Star Wars Insider and the history that magazine has had in the fandom. It's just me this week. Small crew, but let's get into it.
Another happy landing.
All right, welcome back. Every week is a week to celebrate here on Star Wars Escape Pod because all we do is celebrate Star Wars. That seems to be the only thing we talk about around here. Rightfully so. We are Star Wars Escape Pod, not the Escape Pod, not some other Star Wars pod, escape pod. You know, we are Star Wars Escape Pod. This week is Star Wars Insider focused, and that is one of the reasons why I've just decided to kind of buckle down and do this on my own, because I feel like we don't really have enough time, in the coming weeks to do this. We've got other things planned, and other subjects come up, and sometimes I'm self-conscious of other people, just kind of in the room listening while I go on a tangent of reading through pages and pages of material. So, if that's your thing, hopefully I'll make it as interesting as possible for you. But we are reading a little piece from the editor of Star Wars Insider from the final issue, the collector's edition, special collector's edition, that is, the Force Field final issue. So we'll be starting off with that. We'll be going back one issue to issue number 236, exploring an article that celebrates 10 years of Rogue One, and then jumping forward to a few pages from the final issue once again, talking about 50 years since the filming of the original Star Wars film and 30 years of the shadows of the Empire that hit and blew people away in the 90s, as well as a few other things that they pack into this fun final issue of the magazine. And we'll kick things off with it, just really talking about what this magazine is, what it means to people, and just the impact it's had on the fandom over the years. So, for those of you who don't know, Star Wars Insider has been around since 1987, in October that year, 10 years after the release of Star Wars A New Hope. The first issue was actually under the Lucasfilm Fan Club Magazine label and only lasted about 22 issues until 1994, when it changed names and became Star Wars Insider back in 1994. That was with issue number 23. So, between 1987 and 1994, there wasn't a whole lot of issues that would come out. But since 1994, and with the expansion of Star Wars, a lot of fans have had, so much, creative material to look forward to, new movies, shows, books, comics, video games, the works. And with that also increased the amount of material that Star Wars Insider could actually talk about. So we saw an increase in the amount of issues especially in the most recent years, almost every 2 months. So quite the long the long series of magazines over that period of time, ending with issue number 237. So we do celebrate Star Wars Insider for its achievements on making almost 40 years of material for Star Wars fans to read. So big round of applause. So we have a little article here from the editor of Star Wars Insider. Hello there. I lost track of how many issues of Star Wars Insider I've edited, so I recently took myself off to be in a quiet corner and counted them up. It turns out to be ending on a pleasingly round number, 60 issues. Now that my adventure is over, I can only take solace in synchronicity that echoes the words George Lucas used to describe the storytelling of the prequel trilogy. It's like poetry. It rhymes. The saga began for me with a birthday trip into central London to watch Star Wars A New Hope with my parents. Decades later, I returned the favor by taking my mom and my own kids to an early screening of The Rise of Skywalker. This final issue under my stewardship arrives in the 10th anniversary year of Rogue One: A Star Wars Story, a movie that dovetails with the film that started it all. I will always hold a special place in my heart for Star Wars. From my point of view, the circle is now complete, but no one is ever really gone. As far as Insider goes, there are plenty of back issues available to complete your collection. Just buy one every few months and it'll be like we never went away. A huge amount of care and love has been poured into the pages of Star Wars Insider over the years, by contributors too numerous to thank individually here. Enjoy some of their recollections as we celebrate the magazine's long history in the pages of this very special issue. And as Insider rides off into the twin sunsets, remember, the Force will be with you always.
This party's over.
All right, so thank you to the editor, Christopher Cooper. That's a message from him in issue number 237. And a couple pages in, there are some very, very nice little blurbs from various people that I'll read a couple of them that talk about Star Wars Insider over the years. Something else they packed into this issue was an interview from Kathleen Kennedy of the big handoff, the passing of the torch, if you will, to Dave Filoni and the future of the company. And I think I'm going to reserve that one for another time and keep this episode a bit shorter. So the first person, Warwick Davis, the actor behind the costume Wicket the Ewok, has a few kind words to say here. For more than 3 decades, Insider has been the beating heart of the galaxy far, far away. A publication that not only chronicled the saga, but shaped the way generations understood it. Like Obi-Wan Kenobi reminding us that your eyes can deceive you, but don't trust them. The magazine consistently looked beyond the obvious, revealing the craft, creativity, and community that made Star Wars endure. Insider became a trusted guide for fans navigating an ever-expanding universe. Its pages celebrated the visionaries who brought the mythology to life and championed the fans who kept its spirit burning. As Yoda once said, pass on what you have learned. And that is precisely what this magazine has done, passing on knowledge, passion, and wonder with every issue. On a personal note, it was an honor to be featured on Insider several times. To appear in the publication that meant so much to so many is something I will always cherish. As we bid farewell, we echo the words of Leia Organa. Hope is not lost today, it is found. The legacy of Insider lives on in every fan it inspired. Amy Ratcliffe, author and Insider contributor, says, I won't forget the feeling of seeing my name in the print for the first time. It's remained a thrill and honor ever since to contribute to a magazine that's been such a joyful and influential part of my fandom and writing career. I haven't yet come to terms with the end of this era. We have another one from Kelly Knox. Those of you who frequently visit StarWars.com, she is a contributor over there. She says, Insider was one of the only ways a small town kid like me could hear stories from behind the scenes of the original trilogy. I never imagined that decades later, I'd be in the pages of the magazine myself. And for my own work with Star Wars, Insider will always be an unforgettable part of my lifelong Star Wars journey. Gus Lopez, Insider contributor, creator of the Star Wars Collector's Archive, says, I have the complete run of all issues of Insider. I'm kidding, that's not all he said. And I will continue to reference and cherish the magazine as an essential part of my Star Wars library. I'm kidding, he says more. Insider was a great vehicle for sharing information about Star Wars collectibles to this growing area of fandom. Steve Sansweet, on the subject of collectibles, he is the founder of Rancho Obi-Wan, the museum, and one of the largest collections of Star Wars paraphernalia in the world, and former Lucasfilm head of fan relations, says this. I was on the phone in 1994 when Lucasfilm's director of publishing and Dan Madsen were discussing changing the name of the Lucasfilm Fan Club Magazine to Star Wars Insider. I thought it was a great idea, and that was the beginning of my 30-plus year friendship with Dan. For several years, I wrote a column answering collectors' questions and eventually became an in-house editor of the international fan magazines. What an amazing, fulfilling journey it has been. Timothy Zahn, the author and Insider contributor, says this, I've had fun reading Insider over the years. It's been a great run, and I hope you've had fun. Eunice Suotamo, the actor behind the costume of Chewbacca in the most recent films, says, Insider has allowed me to share my on-set experiences with fans, from breaking down Kalnaka's big fight scene to contributing to a guide about Chewbacca. I have loved providing my insight into my approach to playing these extraordinary Wookiees. The one and only Kristen Baver, editor-in-chief of StarWars.com and Insider contributor, says, Insider crystallized what it meant to be a Star Wars fan. It gave me irrefutable, tangible proof that I was far from the only person who adored the galaxy far, far away. I ferociously read each issue cover to cover. My sister and I absolutely adored Anthony Daniels' column growing up, but I think the shopping section of the 1990s was my favorite. It was a lightning in a bottle idea that grew out of a very simple etiquette. The fans matter. Insider has brought people together, sharing their stories and making its readers feel like they were part of something bigger than just a personal fandom. It has been the stuff of dreams for me, and I am so glad to have been part of these pages and this community. There are a number of people all in this section who have had such really, really nice things to say. Again, more authors and contributors to Insider specifically. We got one from Adam Savage, ILM model maker, Mythbusters host. I worked in the effects industry for 10 years, and the only print publication that featured my model making was Insider. It was finally something I could send to my mom. Best of all, it was a pic of me and my colleague, Tori Bellici, who later joined me on Mythbusters. It holds a special place in my heart. It's like a yearbook. Got one from Mark Hamill. Congratulations to everyone involved in the successful run of Star Wars Insider. Both insightful and inspirational. Fans have much to be grateful for. With many thanks, Mark Hamill. I got, two final little ones here. We got one from Pablo Hidalgo, the director, franchise content and strategy at Lucasfilm. Says Star Wars Insider is a time capsule capturing and preserving the evolution of the expanding Star Wars experience. In an age where our promised online information age really didn't come to pass, Having these physical copies on the shelf, being able to dip back into, say, 1999 and experience the buildup of the release of The Phantom Menace is invaluable. I have all my original issues dating back to my teens on my shelf in my office at Lucasfilm. Those of us, and there are many, who consider themselves Star Wars historians, professionally or as a hobby, benefit greatly from all the work contributors put into the magazine. All right, and final one here from David W. Collins, although there are plenty more that I'm not reading, just kind of getting a few of the highlights. David W. Collins is a sound designer, and a voice actor. Says, Insider gave me my very first sense of a much broader Star Wars fan community that I hadn't known existed. It gave me a sense of belonging. I remember seeing rows and rows of magazines in stores, and when I found Insider, it was absolutely a Chewie we're home feeling. Insider was like a Star Wars celebration in magazine form. It has brought happiness to so many people for years and provided a reading experience that helped fans effortlessly connect with the saga that they love. And again, there are a lot in here. If this is the kind of thing that you love, I mean, this is the final. It's a very kind of emotionally packed issue here, being the last one. But those are just some of the things that people had to say. And what I'll do is I'll kind of rewind the clock a little bit, and we'll go back to issue number 236, where we explore an article called Going Rogue. This is the first of one of the bigger ones that we're going to kind of dive into here, and celebrates the release of Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, which was 10 years ago in December of 2016. Let's take a look. All right, Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, released in December 2016. It may have been the second movie of the Disney era, but its storyline dovetailed directly into Star Wars A New Hope. Creator John Knoll, screenwriter Gary Whitta, and director Gareth Edwards tell Insider how the project came together. It is a period of civil war. Rebel spaceships striking from a hidden base have won their first victory against the evil Galactic Empire. During the battle, Rebel spies managed to steal secret plans to the Empire's ultimate weapon, the Death Star. So began the opening crawl of Star Wars A New Hope, setting the scene for the space fantasy adventure that was about to unfold, delighting audiences across the globe. But for one young moviegoer, that brief paragraph of backstory wasn't enough. John Knoll, who in 1986 achieved his dream of joining Industrial Light and Magic, always wanted to know more. The visual effects supervisor, now ILM's executive creative director, finally had a chance to get some answers when he came up with a premise for what would become Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. The inspiration for the movie actually started with two ideas. Knoll tells Star Wars Insider. Firstly, there was a time when the Death Star was a top secret weapon, and nobody knew about it. By the time we got to A New Hope, everybody knew about it and was talking about how to stop it. I was fascinated by the idea of how the rebels found out about the Death Star in the first place. I thought that would be a fun story to tell. The second inspiration came from a quote credited to Senator Leia Organa in the introduction of 1977's novelization of A New Hope. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Naturally, they became heroes. As Knoll explains, between episode 1, 2, and 3, and 4, 5, and 6, there's this time where there were no Jedi anymore. They were all dead or in hiding, and only people standing up and fighting against tyranny and oppression were ordinary beings without the Force. I found that very relatable. You don't have to have these mystical powers to do something meaningful. Encouraged by his colleagues, Knoll began to develop the idea. I was determined to construct a story that followed a logical arc, that had characters and made at least some sense. I spent some time working all of that out, trying to make a good 3-act structure. I wrote the whole thing up, and that's what I pitched to Kathy Kennedy. The pitch Noel presented to Lucasfilm president at the time was a 7-page outline called Destroyer of Worlds, which featured a simple but thrilling story: the mission to steal the original Death Star plans. Jyn Erso at this point was a rebel commando, joined by protocol droid K2SO, as well as several other team members, working with 2 aliens, a massive Wookiee type named Senna, and a tiny skittish character named Lunak. Krennic was also in the mix, but he was an Imperial spy embedded within the rebel team and covertly reporting back to the Imperial Security Bureau. The original Mission Impossible TV series was a huge inspiration for me, Noel reveals. I liked stories that were about the cooperation of a group of experts that came together to do something otherwise impossible. I like that kind of filmmaking as well. Big, highly collaborative projects where you're able to do really remarkable things as a group. With the direction of the story gaining general approval, there was a period of development to further refine Noel's concept. Then it was time to bring in a director who could help hone the vision, which Lucasfilm found in Gareth Edwards. The British filmmaker had cut his teeth on the 2010 micro-budget self-made feature Monsters, which he completed the visual effects on his laptop computer, and a kaiju blockbuster in 2014, Godzilla, the reboot that launched the current Monsterverse. It wasn't on my 2014 bingo card that I would be asked to direct a Star Wars movie, admits Edwards. I hadn't really been thinking about it at all. In fact, that the project was also technically a prequel to A New Hope was very intimidating, as well as exciting. While trying to nail the tone of the initial pitch, Noel used inspirations rooted in classic heist films and caper movies, like The Guns of Navarone in 1961. Edwards additionally reached for the inspirations that George Lucas drew from for the original trilogy. He had spliced in dogfights from the Dam Busters during the initial edit of A New Hope. So I was basically thinking, what was George originally trying to achieve? And what aspects did he leave on the table, says Edwards. The director also watched movies like Akira Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress, 1958, which famously boasted 2 peasant characters that Lucas interpreted into 3PO and R2-D2. You look at those 2 characters, and they already reeked of Star Wars. Edwards hoped that they could strike the same balance with the new characters in Rogue One, like Baze Malbus and Chirrut Imwe. We were trying to layer all this into John's story, and then later Gary Whitta and Chris Weitz screenplays trying to be as Star Wars as possible, and tracing the line backwards. Real-world history also sparked ideas for the movie, specifically the Manhattan Project, the post-war mission led by the USA to develop a nuclear weapon, as told in the 2023 movie Oppenheimer, which also informed Rogue One's production codename Los Alamos. I had worked on the eye-opening documentary about Hiroshima, which was really about J. Robert Oppenheimer, Edwards explains. Having already explored the remorseful years later of Oppenheimer's life, he realized the weight of having created a superweapon like the Death Star could be integrated into the Star Wars mythos. It felt like we could have an Oppenheimer character, someone who is torn, says the director. Another eureka moment came from questioning the design flaw that allowed the rebels to destroy the Death Star in the first place, the thermal exhaust port that would cause a catastrophic chain reaction if blasted by a proton torpedo. We thought, what if this Oppenheimer-like character did that on purpose, says Edwards. A get-out-of-jail-free card in case this thing gets out of hand. There would have to be a way to stop it. When that idea clicked, it felt like it was meant to be. Everything fell into place around that idea. Edwards continued to break the story when Gary Whitta, who also wrote the Book of Eli and After Earth, came on board following an unrelated meeting with members of the Lucasfilm Story Group. Whitta, who is a huge Star Wars fan, got a call from Lucasfilm concerning a mysterious assignment. They said, "We're going to send you an outline to look at, tell us what you think." And it was a short document that John Noel had written called The Destroyer of Worlds. Remembers Whitta, my task was to come up with a deeper take, When I went away and thought about it and decided my approach was to think about it like an old-fashioned World War II soldiers on a mission movie, that just felt like it made sense. The synchronicity between Noel and Weta led to later being brought onto the fledgling production. After I got the job, John Knoll came to see me in my new office at Lucasfilm and said, "Hey, you should see this." He had this little book that had not been shown ahead of writing my outline, which he made for Kathy when he first pitched Rogue One as a standalone film. As I flicked through the pages of the book, it was filled with pictures from World War II movies like The Dirty Dozen from 1967, and all these other things that I had referenced as well. I guess I had just been really lucky in the sense that I basically had the same take that John did. And that's how we got rolling. Edwards and Weta began to hone Noel's idea together, sharing both story sensibilities and a common background. Gareth and I got along right away, says Weta. We are both from England, both around the same age, both guys from traditional working class backgrounds. He is very affable, but when you start listening to him, it's obvious that he's super smart and understands Star Wars and filmmaking in a way that few people do. They continued to develop the Oppenheimer storyline, wanting to craft a new Star Wars tale that dealt with shades of gray rather than typical black and white morality the franchise had previously been known for. That's how we got to the characters Galen Erso and the idea of an Imperial who had turned towards good, and adding Saw Gerrera. Gerrera was a rogue freedom fighter who had already had a history in the Star Wars galaxy before. Having been introduced in the Clone Wars animated series, he proved to be an interesting counterpart to the type of rebel audiences were more familiar with. I wanted Saw to be like Colonel Kurtz, a seasoned military veteran who has basically gone off the deep end. In the first draft of the movie, we literally had a jungle planet where these characters were in a little boat going along this dangerous river. It was very specifically an Apocalypse Now reference. Beyond the characters, one of the largest production challenges was that Rogue One had to feel visually close to A New Hope. Almost as if it too had been filmed in 1976. I laid down some guidelines early on, says Noel, regarding the visual continuity, citing Imperial technology as a prime example. We needed to match memory more than reality. What color is a Star Destroyer? Well, that depends on which reference you look at. There are shots in A New Hope where it's soft off-white, and then throughout Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, the Star Destroyers are much more of a gray and almost blue at times. So, what color are you going to make them? That was true of a million decisions. Edwards agrees, adding, it was a bit like trying to find 6 new letters of the alphabet, or sounds that had never been made. I was always concerned that it wasn't Star Wars enough. In the end, I feel like we found a good balance. If you've grown up with Star Wars or just sort of know, the first time I walked into the Yavin 4 set, I almost cried, remembers Weta. The crew had pulled together the original blueprints for the set designs. It was like stepping through a time portal into 1976, Ellistry. It was so perfectly recreated. I often say that doing this kind of work making movies is the closest thing that exists in the world to actual magic. I got quite emotional. Of course, some of the references were more direct. Battles took on the flavor of the movies that had come before, specifically Return of the Jedi. I love Jedi. I love Gushes Weta. That's a big reason why the Battle of Scarif looks a lot like the Battle of Endor, with big capital ships cutting back and forth between the battle on the ground and the battle in orbit. I really wanted to capture the amazing energy of the Battle of Endor. One legacy callback has become something far greater in the decades since Rogue One's premiere. The return of Rebel Alliance leader Mon Mothma. A role originated by Carolyn Blackiston in Return of the Jedi and previously recast for Star Wars Revenge of the Sith with actress Genevieve O'Reilly. I love Mon Mothma, says Weta. She had that one scene in Jedi, and she seemed so dignified and so sad. In one little performance, you got the sense of someone who had sacrificed a lot for the rebellion. O'Reilly's performance in the prequel had been cut from the final edit of Sith, but enough time had passed that she was now the perfect age to play Mon again in this original trilogy era. I'm glad she's gone on to become a big part of Andor, because that demonstrates that people like that character, says Witta. I had always said that I wanted to know more about Mon Mothma, to see more of her story, and my wish came true. Of course, Mothma was not the only lasting legacy of Rogue One, with the 2-season Disney Plus spin-off Andor garnering critical acclaim and a clutch of Emmy awards. I don't think Andor could have or would have existed without Rogue One, suggested John Knoll. I've been pleased to see it follow things through, which I think have been very positive for the franchise. It also led to a really good sequel called A New Hope, chimes in Gareth Edwards. Yeah. After he checked it out, it inspired George to go back in time, jokes Knoll. Actually, Knoll knows exactly what Lucas thought about their work. I got a phone call from George just after he'd come out of the screening for Rogue One, and he was pretty effusive with his praise, says Knoll. That meant a lot to me because I had worked with him for all that time during the prequels, and to know that he liked it really meant a lot to me. I'd have taken the whole world hating it and George liking it over the other way around for sure, says Gareth Edwards. All right, and that is the article for Rogue One, 10 years. You can find that in issue number 236, along with so many other things. There's a interview from with the actor Alistair Petrie, who plays Draven from Rogue One. He has a whole thing in there. There was some stuff about the Rebuild the Galaxy, and there's always a short story. In every Star Wars Insider, some author has gone out of their way to take on the task of writing a little short story that either ties into a novel that they've written, or into somebody else's novel, or into a video game or something. There's always something going on in these insiders. Even if you just bought them for the short stories, some of them are pretty fun. All right, so that's issue number 236. There's a little blurb in there about Maul Shadow Lord as well. That's issue number 236. All right, let's dive into one or two things from issue number 237 here. We've already gone over some of the special things that people have to say, but what we didn't go over was that this issue does actually celebrate 30 years of Shadows of the Empire, which I know one or two people out there might be giving a little whoop whoop from their living room couch right about now. But Shadows of the Empire remains to be a very highly regarded multimedia project in the 90s. The Star Wars saga was in a very different place in 1996 than it is today. The special editions of the original trilogy were scheduled to be released in theaters in 1997, re-released, that is, and George Lucas was still working on the early drafts of The Phantom Menace. Yet a casual fan could easily have assumed that a new movie was already out, based on the amount of Star Wars action figures and collectibles and video games that kept appearing on the store shelves at the time. Star Wars Shadows of the Empire was not just a book, not just a video game, and not just a comic book series. In fact, the marketing campaign described it as everything but the movie. Shadows was full of Star Wars stories set between Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back and Star Wars Return of the Jedi, following the green-skinned alien Prince Xizor and his attempt to control the galaxy. In celebration of the 30th anniversary of Shadows' release, Star Wars Insider spoke with the former director of publishing at Lucasfilm, Lucy Autry Wilson, author Steve Perry, and LucasArts designer John Knowles, not to be confused with John Knoll. About the multimedia initiative. Leading the publishing side of the project was the first permanent employee of Lucasfilm and multi-talented Lucy Autry Wilson. Wilson had started her career at the company as a bookkeeper and secretary to George Lucas in 1974. Lucy says, "I had tried to move to Europe and it didn't work out, so I came back to the States and realized I was going to have to work for a living. I thought I should move up to Northern California, and that was my goal. So I called my sister who lived in the Bay Area and asked if she knew anybody looking for a bookkeeper. She happened to know that George Lucas was looking for an office on the Universal lot in Los Angeles, and I was interviewed by George and Gary Kurtz. Although George hardly opened his mouth because my sister's boss recommended me, I got the job. Packed my stuff up and moved on up. I didn't even know where Marin County was. Law says, I had studied English literature in college, so I had always wanted to be in publishing, but I didn't want to live in New York, so I had kind of given up on the idea. But when I went to Lucasfilm, even before the original movie had come out, Charlie Lippincott and Carol Tittleman were already doing some book-related things. I used to go down to LA to visit them and poke around. Over time, I started begging them to let me do some things in the publishing area, so I did some stuff on Willow and Indiana Jones and the Grateful Dead. They were a client of ours back then, so I got my foot in the door a little bit. Eventually, the publishing head left. I was interested, and the company said I could take over. They didn't think it was going to be anything, so they basically told me, okay, you can run this department, but if it doesn't work out, you're out of a job. So I took the big risk. The relaunched publishing program kicked off in full effect with the launch of Timothy Zahn's 1991 novel, Star Wars: Heir to the Empire. After a few years, the several new and best-selling expanded universe novels, it was time for new ideas, leading to the creation of a movie marketing campaign without the movie. Law says, when we first started out with the Star Wars books, we just let every author write what they wanted, as long as we maintained some sort of continuity. But after a while, I wanted to juice things up a little bit. We were in this in-between stage where we didn't know there was going to be another series of movies coming out, but we didn't know what we wanted to do until then. Another big marketing push that next year wasn't working out, so the company wanted to do something else. That sounded like a lot of fun, and we had enough lead time to do it. A meeting at Skywalker Ranch in 1994 brought together department heads from across the company, as well as some creatives, including established science fiction author Steve Perry and LucasArts designer John Knowles. Steve Perry says, I had cranked out the movie novelization for The Mask in 18 working days as a favor to an editor at Bantam Spectre Books, he said, and he owed me one. And came back and said, I'm working on this Star Wars project, and we're looking for a writer. Would you be interested? Well, a writer never turns down work, so I said, yeah, sure. John Knowles says, before Star Wars, I drew all the time as a kid. A friend of mine loved to draw, and it was usually Western stuff. I would draw a good guys being on one side, and he would draw bad guys on the other side. And we would draw these little battles as they were falling out of windows, and as if they were falling out of windows and stuff. But when Star Wars came out, I started drawing spaceships and rockets. And we started drawing space battles all the time. I went to art school in Seattle, and I was an illustrator and airbrush artist. I did a lot of photoreal type paintings of jets and of Harrison Ford. I sent a VHS tape of my reel, a portrait of Harrison, and some other stuff to Lucasfilm Games. As it was then, and they said, why don't you come down? So I drove from Seattle to the Bay Area, slept on a friend's floor, and tested for a week, doing a bunch of artwork at Skywalker Ranch. At the end of the week, they said, okay, you can stay. And that's where I was for the next 14 years. I started in art and moved into design. Shadows of the Empire was the first video game I took on as a lead designer. Perry says, after I got the job, they sent me out to the ranch to sit down with a group of people to explain what the project was about. I flew into San Francisco and we all sat down around a big table. All of the players had a general idea of what they wanted. Something dark, something about the galactic underworld. We sat around and started spitballing ideas and characters. John says, we had done quite a few play the movie games where Super Star Wars Trilogy for Nintendo, but we didn't want to just do that again because of the time period in which the story was going to be set and because it was going to be about the seedy underbelly of the galaxy. I thought the bones could be a Boba Fett trying to get Han Solo to Jabba the Hutt. He would be having a very difficult time because everyone else would want to get him. But in the end, we couldn't use Boba Fett. So if we couldn't play as him or my favorite character Han Solo, we needed to be somebody else, the main character of the game. Steve Perry also wanted a rogue type of guy to fill the vacant shoes that was Solo. So he came up with the name and a description. And I thought, okay, well, we'll make him the main character of the game. The main character was Dash Rendar, a smuggler and mercenary who would serve as the point of view character for the Shadows video game. John says, Dash then needed a cool ship, and it seemed natural that he came from the same planet as Han Solo. He was cut from the same cloth. These Corellian guys probably all knew each other. They all drove hot rods and I heard that artist Doug Chang had been doing some sketches and designs for the special editions, like the swoops. So I sat down with him and talked about Dash's ship. Two of my favorite ships from the original trilogy are the Millennium Falcon and the B-Wing Fighter. I liked the asymmetrical nature of them, and Doug really did too. So we thought we could do a mashup of those two. He whipped out an amazing sketch, and I immediately came up with the name Outrider. Because Outrigger just jumped into my mind, and Outrider is someone who rides on the fringes of a convoy looking for trouble. Okay, but what about the shoulder pads? John says, honestly, that one was out of necessity. We had been planning to do a third-person shooter game. There hadn't been much like it back then. We had some sneak peeks of what the developers were doing in Super Mario 64, and we couldn't do what they were doing with the technology at that time. We were only able to build things with rotating capsules, and the place where you could see that the most was in the shoulders. The only way we could fix that was by hiding them. So that's where Dash's shoulder pads came in, to hide the inner penetrations of the upper arm to shoulder rotation in the animation. The primary antagonist of Shadows was Prince Shizor, of the infamous Black Sun criminal organization. He was a reptilian feline whose name proved to be less alien in origin than one might expect. Law says, I had a Portuguese boyfriend when I was living in Europe. I was going to live there forever, but then he got drafted into the war in Mozambique, and I went back to living in Spain. We ended up breaking up, but remained friends. His name was Francisco, but his nickname was Zico. And in Portugal, you pronounce the X with a sh sound. So, Chico, I guess. If you're an English speaker, an X that has a unique sound can sound sort of alien. So I combined that with Razor because Shizor is a bad guy, and it sounded very cool to me. I volunteered the name to the group, and it was accepted. Steve Perry says, I made sure to pronounce it at least once in the books so that people would know how to say it, but people still got it wrong. The collaborative storytelling went hand in hand with the cutting-edge work that the Lucasfilm team was doing. Shadows of the Empire was going to be one of the early marquee games for the new Nintendo 64 video game system. John Knowles says, it felt like we were part of a pioneering group of people in the industry that was leading the way with real-time 3D work. You could turn around and look at an interactive 3D environment, and no one had ever really done that before. The only thing that was capable of emulating the graphics you were going to see was a box that they gave us called the Onyx. It gave off so much heat that the person who was sharing their office with the Onyx always had to have a fan on and their door open. And Nintendo was saying, oh yeah, we're going to put that power in a little box that's not much bigger than the Super Nintendo. It ended up being true. Wow, it's crazy. In 2006, Lucasfilm licensing president Howard Rothman revealed to StarWars.com that Shadows of the Empire was made possible after George Lucas adjusted his writing schedule for Episode 1, which had originally been planned for a 1997 release. At that point, it made much more sense to move the special edition release to 1997 for the 20th anniversary of A New Hope, which left us empty in 1996, Rothman explained. We put our heads together and thought, okay, what media do we have at our control and how do we communicate with people? What if we put them all together and come up with a really significant story that would be big news for fans that all the different media could play off of? So there was nothing I wanted to do more with this new technology than fly a snowspeeder and take down an AT-AT at the Battle of Hoth. The first time we were able to actually fly through the legs of a walker. We all just stood around the TV agog. So we said, well, Dash was there too, why not? Upon its release in 1996, the Shadows experiment was deemed a considerable success. The book reached the New York Times bestseller list, and the video game was the third best-selling title for the new Nintendo 64 the following year, with over 1 million copies sold. Noel says, I am reminded by people who grew up playing Shadows of the Empire that it was mind-blowing and amazing for them. It's hard for me to look past all of its flaws sometimes, but I have to remind myself that at the time it was pretty revolutionary. Law says, Shadows was a fun project to do, but I don't think we could have repeated it. By the nature of the medium and development process, the game's teams could never get anything done as quickly as we could publish our books. Shadows taught me that it was far easier for me to do things as our own little group where I could control everything. The next time I wanted to do something as ambitious, which turned out to be the New Jedi Order, a 19-book series that began in 1999, she says, I wanted to do it to be solely publishing. And Steve Perry says, I have nothing but fond memories of the experience. Shadows of the Empire changed my first name, and I was no longer just Steve. I was New York Times best-selling author Steve. I've always been very happy with that. So the article carries on into talking a little bit about the legends of the Empire, Heir to the Empire, and its story by Timothy Zahn, but I'm not going to dive into that. All right, a little blip here. The Star Wars Archive. The behind-the-scenes story of the galaxy far, far away. We only have like one little tidbit of text here, and then I'm going to read the final afterword. 50 years ago, on March 22nd, 1976, the first shots for Star Wars A New Hope were committed to film. It had been a long journey for George Lucas, who had begun formulating his idea for a grand space fantasy 3 years earlier, and had faced an uphill struggle to finance the film before his crew and cast arrived in Tunisia. The first scenes shot involved the purchase of R2-D2 and C-3PO at the Lars Homestead exterior set, way out in the Tunisian desert. They would film more Tatooine locations at Matmata, the homestead interiors, and on the island of, if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Jerba, where its iconic domed buildings perfectly represented Mos Eisley Spaceport. As production on the new Star Wars live-action tales continue, Insider celebrates the past 5 decades of the creative endeavor one last time. And they include a variety of very cool behind-the-scenes photos from both Tunisia, the Return of the Jedi set on board the Death Star. We've got one of the Tauntaun going through its little miniature set. We have photos from the prequels. We have photos from the sequels. Lightsaber training on Ahsoka. We've got photos of Obi-Wan Kenobi, the TV show, The Mandalorian. We do have an afterword by Dan Madsen, the creator of Star Wars Insider. All right, Star Wars has played an important role in my life since I first saw it in 1977. As a 14-year-old boy, to become involved with the franchise was a dream come true, and Star Wars Insider was a labor of love for me after I founded it in the 1980s. First, as the Lucasfilm Fan Club Magazine, and then switching over to Insider before the prequels were released. I've made so many friends with those who have made the movies and television shows, and of course the fans. Professionally, it allowed me to do so many other things and provide jobs for hundreds of people over the years who have worked for Insider. People's lives have been changed as a result of the magazine's existence. We launched Star Wars Insider on the 10th anniversary of A New Hope, although we had to wait many years before we had anything new concerning the saga to talk about. During the downtime between Return of the Jedi and The Phantom Menace, there wasn't another place to keep up to date with what was happening with the franchise. And the Insider filled that space by providing informative articles, interviews with cast and crew members, exclusive merchandise, and giving fans a reason to be hopeful that Star Wars would return someday. I honestly believe, and I've been told this as well, that Insider kept Star Wars fandom alive, active, and interesting when there wasn't a whole lot to talk about. Star Wars Insider and the Lucasfilm Fan Club Magazine nurtured and fed Star Wars fans' insatiable appetite and more coverage. And once the prequels came out, the doors were wide open to give them a kind of exclusive coverage that they expected from an official magazine. I feel very proud to have launched Star Wars Insider into the world. And I am equally proud of all the talented individuals who have contributed to its long existence. Over the many issues to entertain and inform the fans, the fact that Insider has lasted so long is a legacy I don't take lightly. I take great pride in the quality of work that has found its way onto the pages of the magazine during my time and thereafter, and will be forever proud of its place in Star Wars history. You can find a lot of these as well as collector's edition published versions, hardbacks that look back at various Star Wars Insider articles and interviews over the years. You can find them in your local bookstore, your Indigo, Barnes & Noble. And they usually just chop out a lot of the Star Wars merch things and, some of the pages that just kind of act as filler material. We're going to save the Kathy Kennedy interview for another day, as well as maybe a few other things in here we'll probably revisit. But yeah, Insider, thank you to Dan for many years of great Star Wars fun. I remember my first issue was, I think it was 2006 or something like that. Like it was a while ago. And my late grandmother had purchased that for me at the mall. So, I feel like anyone who has had Insider over the years has some sort of memories attached to it. And, if you're creative enough with the internet, you can find digital versions of every single issue out there. And I know that the Wayback Machine archive.org does have a pretty good catalog up until issue number 153. So, at the very least, you can find a good amount online and explore some of those issues for yourself. Otherwise, yeah, hit your Shoppers Drug Mart, pick yourself up as many as you can find, and, read through some of the many great articles over the years. So, here's to Star Wars Insider. It's been a good one. May the Force be with you. And may the Force be with all of you listening at home. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you in the next one.